Hello, and welcome back to the Silmarillion. We are on chapter 22, I think? Let's see here, Yes, okay. Just wasn't showing up for a minute. Let's add that. Hopefully everyone's doing well today. Just fixing all my settings and then we'll get started. Okay, that should be saving. Alright, and we want to go here. Here we go. Hello, Alexis. I'm pretty good. How are you? Let's see. Put that there. Alright. So this week, we are reading about the Nirnaeth Arnoedad, the fifth battle between the peoples of Middle-earth and big bad guy. I can't talk today. It's a kind of short section, so we will also start the next big story, which is of Turin Turambar. It's longer than Beren and Luthien was, so we will not get far in it today, but we'll start it. So that's the plan for today. The lovely artwork you see is mostly fan art, and the links to that are listed underneath the art of whoever is on the page. Go away. Alright. Hello, Nacho. Hello, Ratch. Alright, we'll give it another minute-ish so. So this is chapter 20. Last week we finished the story of Beren and Luthien, the great epic romance. They both kind of died and were resurrected to be humans so that they could live together and die together. And then, you know, that's kind of their story. They have children who will eventually come back up in all the stories later, but they're the past. This is what happens around the same time as the Beren and Luthien story, but they aren't involved. This is the next great battle of the elves and humans and everybody. Hey, Jeff, welcome. So this is chapter 20 of the fifth battle, Nirnaeth Arnoedad. It is said that Beren and Luthien returned to the northern lands of Middle-earth, and dwelt together for a time as living man and woman, and they took up again their mortal form in Doriath. Those that saw them were both glad and fearful, and Luthien went to Menegroth, and healed the winter of Thingol with the touch of her hand. But Melian looked in her eyes and read the doom that was written there, and turned away, for she knew that a parting beyond the end of the world had come between them, and no grief of loss has been heavier than the grief of Melian the Maya in that hour. Then Beren and Luthien went forth alone, fearing neither thirst nor hunger, and they passed beyond the river Gelion into Assyrian, and dwelt there in Tol Galen, the green isle, in the mist of Adirant, until all tidings of them ceased. The Eldar, they are elders. The Eldar afterwards called that country Dorfin Iguinar, the land of the dead that live, and there was born Dior Arinel the Beautiful, who was known after as Dior Ulukil, which is Thingol's heir. No mortal man spoke ever again with Beren son of Barahir, and none saw Beren or Luthien leave the world, or marked where at last their bodies lay. In those days, Maedhros, son of Fëanor, lifted up his heart, perceiving that Morgoth was not unassailable, for the deeds of Beren and Luthien were sung in many songs throughout Beleriand. Yet Morgoth would destroy them all one by one if they could not again unite and make new league and common council. And he began those councils for the raising of the fortunes of the Eldar that are called the Union of Maedhros. Yet the oath of Fëanor and the evil deeds that it had wrought did injury to the design of Maedhros, and he had less aid than he should have. Orodreth would not march forth at the word of any son of Fëanor because of the deeds of Celegorm and Corufin, and the elves of Nagathron trusted still to defend their hidden stronghold by secrecy and stealth. Hello, Phil. Welcome. Thence came only a small company, following Gwyndor son of Gulin, a very valiant prince, and against the will of Orodreth he went to the Northern War, because he grieved for the loss of Gelmir his brother in the Dagor Bragolach. They took the badge of the House of Fingolfin and marched beneath the banners of Fingon, and they never came back, save one. From Doriath came little help, for Maedhros and his brothers, being constrained by their oath, had before sent to Thingol and reminded him with haughty words of their claim, summoning him to yield the Silmaril or become their enemy. Melian counseled him to surrender it, but the words of the sons of Fëanor were proud and threatening, and Thingol was filled with anger, thinking of the anguish of Luthien and the blood of Beren whereby the jewel had been won, despite the malice of Celegorm and Corufin. And every day he looked upon the Silmaril, the more he desired to keep it forever, for such was its power. Therefore he sent back the messengers with scornful words. Maedhros made no answer, for he had now begun to devise the league and union of the elves. But Celegorm and Corufin vowed openly to slay Thingol and destroy his people if they came victorious from war, and the jewel were not surrendered of free will. Then Thingol fortified the marches of his realm and went not to war, nor any out of Doriath save Mablung and Beleg, who were unwilling to have no part in these great deeds. To them Thingol gave leave to go, so long as they served not the sons of Fëanor, and they joined themselves to the host of Fingon. But Maedhros had the help of the Nalgrim, the dwarves, both in armed force and in great store of weapons, and the smithies of Nogrod and Belagost were busy in those days. And he gathered together all his brothers and all the people who would follow them, and the men of Bor and Ulfang were marshaled and trained for war, and they summoned yet more of their kinsfolk out of the east. Moreover, in the west, Fingon, ever the friend of Maedhros, took counsel with Himring, and in Hithlum the Noldor and the men of the house of Hador prepared for war. In the forest of Brethil Halmir, lord of the people of Halath, gathered his men, and they whetted their axes. But Halmir died ere the war came, and Haldir his son ruled that people, and to Gondolin also the tidings came, to Turgon the hidden king. But Maedhros made trial of his strength too soon, ere his plans were full wrought. And though the orcs were driven out of all the northward regions of Beleriand, and even Dorthonion was freed for a while, Morgoth was warned of the uprising of the Eldar and the elf friends, and took counsel against them. Many spies and workers of treason he sent forth among them, as he was the better able now to do so, for the faithless men of his secret allegiance were yet deep in the secrets of the sons of Fëanor. At length Maedhros, having gathered all the strength that he could of the elves, men, and dwarves, resolved to assault Angband from east and west, and he proposed to march with banners displayed in open force over Anfauglith. But when he had drawn forth, as he hoped, the armies of Morgoth in answer, then Fingon should issue forth from the passes of Hithlum, and thus they thought to take the might of Morgoth as between anvil and hammer, and break it to pieces. And the signal for this was to be the firing of a great beacon in Dorthonion. On the appointed day, on the morning of midsummer, the trumpets of the Eldar greeted the rising of the sun, and in the east was raised the standard of the sons of Fëanor, and in the west the standard of Fingon, high king of the Noldor. Then Fingon looked out from the walls of Ethelsirion, and his host was arrayed in the valleys and the woods upon the east of Eredwethrin, well hid from the eyes of the enemy, but he knew that it was very great. For there all the Noldor of Hithlum were assembled, together with elves of the Falas and Gwyndor's company from Nagathrond, and he had great strength of men. Upon the right were the host of Dorloman, and all the valor of Hurin and Huor his brothers, and to them had come Haldir of Brethil with many men of the woods. Then Fingon looked towards Thangorodrim, and there was a dark cloud about it, and a black smoke went up, and he knew that the wrath of Morgoth was aroused, and that their challenge was accepted. A shadow of doubt fell upon Fingon's heart, and he looked eastward, seeking if he might, with elven sight, the dust of Anfauglith rising beneath the hosts of Maedhros. He knew not that Maedhros was hindered in his setting forth by the guile of Uldor the Accursed, who deceived him with false warnings of assault from Angband. But now a cry went up, passing up the wind from the south from vale to vale, and elves and men lifted their voices in wonder and joy. For unsummoned and unlooked for, Turgon had opened the leaguer of Gondolin, and was come with an army 10,000 strong, with bright mail and long swords and spears like a forest. Then, with Fingon heard afar the great trumpet of Turgon his brother, the shadow passed and his heart was uplifted, and he shouted aloud, oh jeez. Utulien aure, Utulien aure, Aya Ildale, Ar Atananari, Utulien, I definitely said none of that right. He said a bunch of Elvish. The day has come. Behold, people of the Eldar and fathers of men, the day has come. And all those who heard his great voice echo in the hills answered, crying, Ata Ilome, the night is passing. Now Morgoth, who knew of much of what was done and designed by his enemies, chose his hour, and trusting in his treacherous servants to hold back Maedhros and prevent the union of his foes, he sent a force seeming great, yet but part of all that he had made, toward Hithlum, and they were clad all in dun raiment and showed no naked steel, and thus were already far over the sands of Anfauglith before their approach was seen. Then the hearts of the Noldor grew hot, and their captains wished to assail their foes upon the plain. But Hurin spoke against it, and bade them beware of the guile of Morgoth, whose strength was always greater than it seemed, and his purpose other than he revealed. And though the signal of the approach of Maedhros came not, and the host grew impatient, Hurin urged them still to wait, and not let the orcs break themselves in assault upon the hills. But the captain of Morgoth in the west had been commanded to draw out Fingon swiftly from his hills by whatever means he could. He marched on, therefore, until the front of his battle was drawn up before the stream of Sirion, from the walls of the fortress of Ethel-Sirion to the inflowing of Revil at the fen of Serek, and the outposts of Fingon could see the eyes of their enemies. But there was no answer to his challenge, and the taunts of the orcs faltered as they looked upon the silent walls and the hidden threat of the hills. Then the captain of Morgoth sent out riders with tokens of parley, and they rode up before the outworks of the Barad Aethel. With them they brought Gelmir, son of Gulin, that lord of Nargothrond, who they had captured in Bragalach, and they had blinded him. Then the heralds of Angband showed him forth, crying, We have many more such at home, but you must make haste if you would find them, for we shall deal with them all when we return, even so. And they hewed off Gelmir's hands and feet, and his head last, within sight of the elves, and left him. By ill chance at that place in the outworks stood Gwyndor of Nargothrond, the brother of Gelmir. Now his wrath was kindled to madness, and he leapt forth on horseback, and many riders with him. And they pursued the heralds and slew them, and drove on deep into the main host. And seeing this, all the host of the Noldor was set on fire, and Fingon put on his white helm and sounded his trumpets, and all the host of Hithlum leapt forth from the hills in sudden onslaught. The light of the drawing of the swords of the Noldor was like a fire in a field of reeds, and so fell and swift was their onset that almost the designs of Morgoth went astray. Before the army that he sent westward could be strengthened, it was swept away, and the banners of Fingon passed over Anfauglith and were raised before the walls of Angband. Ever in the forefront of that battle went Gwyndor and the elves of Nargothrond, and even now they could not be constrained. And they burst through the gate and slew the guards upon the very stairs of Angband, and Morgoth trembled upon his deep throne, hearing them beat upon his doors. But when they were trapped there, all were slain save Gwyndor only, whom they took alive, for Fingon could not come to their aid. By many secret doors in Thangordrim, Morgoth had let issue forth his main host that he held in waiting, and Fingon was beaten back with great loss from the walls. Then in the plain of Anfauglith, on the 4th day of the war, there began Ninarniath Arnoedad, unnumbered tears, for no song or tale can contain all its grief. the host of Fingon retreated over the sands, and Haldir, lord of the Halidin, was slain in the rear guard. With him fell most of the men of Brethil, and came never back to their woods. But on the 5th day, as night fell, and they were still far from Ered Wethrin, the orcs surrounded the host of Hithlam, and they fought until day, pressed ever closer. In the morning came hope, when the horns of Turgon were heard as he marched up with the main host of Gondolin, for they had been stationed southward guarding the pass of Sirion, and Turgon restrained most of his people from the rash onslaught. Now he hastened to the aid of his brother, and the Gondoladrim were strong and clad in mail, and their ranks shone like a river of steel in the sun. Now the phalanx of the guard of the king broke through the ranks of the orcs, and Turgon hewed his way to the side of his brother, and it is told that in the meeting of Turgon with Hurin, who stood beside Fingon, was glad in the midst of battle. Then hope was renewed in the hearts of the elves, and in that very time, at the 3rd hour of morning, the trumpets of Maedhros were heard at last coming up from the east, and the banners of the sons of Fëanor assailed them in the rear. Some have said that even then the Eldar might have won the day, had all their hosts proved faithful, for the orcs wavered, and their onslaught was stayed, and already some were turning to flight. But even as the vanguard of Maedhros came upon the orcs, Morgoth loosed his last strength, and Angband was emptied. There came wolves and wolf riders, and came Balrogs and dragons, and Glaurung, father of dragons. The strength and terror of the great worm was now great indeed, and the elves and men withered before him, and he came between the hosts of Maedhros and Fingon and swept them apart. Yet neither by wolf, nor by Balrog, nor by dragon would Morgoth have achieved his end, but for the treachery of men. In this hour the plots of Ulfang were revealed. Many of the Easterlings turned and fled, their hearts being filled with lies and fear. But the sons of Ulfang went over suddenly to Morgoth and drove in upon the rear of the sons of Fëanor, and in the confusion that they wrought they came near to the standard of Maedhros. They reaped not the reward that Morgoth promised them, for Maglor slew Uldor the Accursed, the leader in treason, and the sons of Bor slew Ulfast and Ulwarth ere they themselves were slain. But new strength of evil men came up that Uldor had summoned and kept hidden in the eastern hills, and the host of Maedhros was assailed now on 3 sides, and it broke, and was scattered, and fled this way and that. Yet fate saved the sons of Fëanor, and though they were all wounded, none were slain, for they drew together. And gathering a remnant of the Noldor and the Nalgrim, they hewed away out of the battle, and escaped away toward Mount Dolmed in the east. Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us. Mr. Hane Koma, thank you for joining us. A Balrog is, if you've seen the movie, it's the big fiery monster that Gandalf fights. It's basically a giant fallen angel with a whip and fire and wings. It kind of looks like, what's that guy from Fantasia? You know, that thing? That's a Balrog. It is big, black wings. Chernabog, that's what it is. Looks like that. Big, horrible monster. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I put the right... Yes, okay. We're almost to the part I need to change the image. Okay. Last of all the eastern force to stand firm were the dwarves of Belegost, and thus they won renown. For the Nalgrim withstood fire more heartily than either elves or men, and it was their custom, moreover, to wear great masks in battle, hideous to look upon. And those stood them in good stead against the dragons. And but for them, Glaurung and his brood would have withered all that was left of the Noldor. But the Nalgrim made a circle about him when he assailed them, and even his mighty armor was not full proof against the blows of their great axes. And when in his rage Glaurung turned and struck down Azaghal, lord of Belegost, and crawled over him, with his last stroke Azaghal drove a knife into his belly, and so wounded him that he fled the field, and the beasts of Angband in dismay followed after him. Then the dwarves raised up the body of Azaghal and bore it away, and with slow steps they walked behind, singing a dirge in deep voices, as it were a funeral pomp in their country, and gave no heed more to their foes, and none dared to stay them. But now in the western battle, Fingon and Turgon were assailed by a tide of foes thrice greater than all the force that was left to them. Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, High Captain of Angband, was come, and he drove a dark wedge between the elven hosts, surrounding King Fingon and thrusting Turgon and Hurin aside towards the fen of Serek. Then he turned upon Fingon. That was a grim meeting. At last Fingon stood alone with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog until another Balrog came behind and cast a throng of fire about him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. The field was lost, but still Hurin and Huor and the remnants of the house of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the hosts of Morgoth could not yet win the pass of Sirion. Then Hurin spoke to Turgon, saying, "Go now, Lord, while time is, for in you lives the last hope of the Eldar, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall still know fear in his heart." But Turgon answered, "Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered, it must fall." Then Huor spoke and said, "Yet if it stands but a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death, though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall rise. Farewell." And Maeglin, Turgon's sister son, who stood by, heard these words and did not forget them, but he said nothing. So he's just now kind of had either he knew, I don't know if he knew something from beforehand, I think maybe somebody said to him, he had some kind of vision. He's like, listen, our bloodlines are going to lead to our future or something or other. Like, but you have to escape and have a kid or something. I can't remember exactly, but Gondolin has to live, so you need to escape. Turgon took the counsel of Hurin and Huor, and summoning all that remained of the host of Gondolin and such of Fingon's people as could be gathered, he retreated towards the pass of Sirion, and his captains, Ecthelion and Glorfindel, guarded the flanks to the right and left, so that none of the enemy should pass them by. But the men of Dor-Lomin held the rear guard, as Hurin and Huor desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to leave the Northlands, and if they could not win back their homes, there they would stand to the end. Thus was the treachery of Uldor redressed, and of all the deeds of war that the fathers of men wrought in behalf of the Eldar, the last stand of the men of Dor-Lomin is the most renowned. So it was that Turgon fought his way southward, until coming behind the guard of Hurin and Huor, he passed down Sirion and escaped, and he vanished into the mountains and was hidden from the eyes of Morgoth. But the brothers drew the remnant of the men of the house of Hador about them, and foot by foot they withdrew until they came behind the fen of Serek, and had the stream of Revil between them. There they stood and gave way no more. Then all the hosts of Angband swarmed against them, and they bridged the stream with their dead, and encircled the remnant of Hithlum as a gathering tide about a rock. There as the sun westerned on the 6th day, and the shadow of Ered Wethrin grew dark, Huor fell pierced with a venom arrow in his eye, and all the valiant men of Hador were slain about him in a heap, and the orcs hewed their heads and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset. Last of all, Hurin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield and wielded an axe two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog until it withered. And each time that he slew, Hurin cried, "Ar Entuvula, day shall come again." 70 times he uttered that cry, but they took him at last alive, by the command of Morgoth, for the orcs grappled him with their hands, which clung to him still, though he hewed off their arms, and even their numbers were renewed, until at last he fell buried beneath them. Then Gothmog bound him, and dragged him to Angband with mockery. Thus ended Nirnaeth Arnoedad, as the sun went down beyond the sea. Night fell in Hithlum, and there came a great storm of wind out of the west. Great was the triumph of Morgoth, and his design was accomplished in a manner after his own heart. For men took the lives of men and betrayed the Eldar, and fear and hatred were aroused among those who should have been united against him. From that day the hearts of the elves were estranged from men, save only those of the 3 houses of the Edain. The realm of Fingon was no more, and the sons of Fëanor wandered as leaves before the wind. Their arms were scattered, and their league broken, and they took to a wild and woodland life beneath the feet of Ered Lindon, mingling with the green elves of Osiriand, bereft of their power and glory of old. In Brethel some few of the Halidin yet dwelt in the protection of their woods, and Handir, son of Haldir, was their lord. But to Hithlum came back never one of Fingon's host, nor any of the men of Hador's house, nor any tidings of the battle and the fate of their lords. But Morgoth sent hither the Easterlings that had served him, denying them the rich lands of Beleriand which they coveted, and he shut them in Hithlum and forbade them to leave it. Such was the reward he gave them for their treachery to Maedhros, to plunder and harass the old and women and children of Hador's people. The remnant of the Eldar of Hithlum were taken to the mines of the north and labored there as thralls, save some that eluded him and escaped into the wilds and the mountains. The orcs and the wolves went freely through all the north, and came ever further southward into Beleriand, even as far as Nenethrin, the land of willows, and the borders of Osiriand, and none were safe in field or wild. Doriath indeed remained, and the halls of Nagathron were hidden, but Morgoth gave small heed to them, either because he knew little of them, or because their hour was not yet come in the deep purposes of his malice. Many now fled to the havens and took refuge behind Círdan's walls, and the mariners passed up and down the coast and harried the enemy with swift landings. But in the next year, ere the winter was come, Morgoth sent great strength over Hithlum and Nevrast, and they came down the rivers Brithin and Nenning, and ravaged all the Fallis, and besieged the walls of Berthombar and Elgarest. Smiths and miners and masters of fire they brought with them, and they set up great engines, and valiantly though they were resisted, they broke the walls at last. Then the havens were laid in ruins, and the tower of Barad Nimros cast down, and the most part of Círdan's people were slain or enslaved. But some went aboard ship and escaped by sea, and among them was Erenion Gilgalad, the son of Fingon, whom his father had sent to the havens after the Dagor Bragolak. This remnant sailed with Círdan south to the Isle of Balar, and they made a refuge for all that could come thither, for they kept a foothold also at the mouths of Sirion, and there many light and swift ships lay hid in the creeks and waters where the reeds were dense as forests. And when Turgon heard of this, he sent again his messengers to Sirion's mouths, and besought the aid of Círdan the shipwright. At the bidding of Turgon, Círdan built 7 swift ships, and they sailed out into the west, but no tiding of them ever came back to Balar, save of one and the last. The mariners of that ship toiled long in the sea, and returning at last in despair, they foundered in a great storm within sight of the coasts of Middle-earth. But one of them was saved by Ulmo from the wrath of Osei, and the waves bore him up and cast him ashore in Nevrast. His name was Varonwe, and he was one of those that Turgon sent forth as messengers from Gondolin. Now the thought of Morgoth dwelt ever upon Turgon, for Turgon had escaped him, of all his foes that one whom he most desired to take or destroy, and that thought troubled him and marred his victory. For Turgon of the mighty house of Fingolfin was now by right king of all the Noldor, and Morgoth feared and hated the house of Fingolfin, because they had friendship of Ulmo his foe, and because of the wounds that Fingolfin gave him with his sword. And most of all his kin Morgoth feared Turgon, for of old in Valinor his eye had lighted upon him, and whenever he drew near a shadow had fallen on his spirit, foreboding that in some time that yet lay hidden, from Turgon ruin should come for him. Therefore Hurin was brought before Morgoth, for Morgoth knew that he had the friendship of the king of Gondolin, but Hurin defied him and mocked him. Then Morgoth cursed Hurin and Morwen and their offspring, and set a doom upon them of darkness and sorrow. And taking Hurin from prison, he set him in a chair of stone upon a high place of Thangorodrim. There he was bound by the power of Morgoth, and Morgoth standing beside him cursed him again, and said, "Sit now there and look out upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those whom thou lovest. Thou hast dared to mock me, and to question the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore with my eyes thou shalt see, and with my ears thou shalt hear. And never shalt thou move from this place until all is fulfilled unto its bitter end. And even so it came to pass, but it is not said that Hurin asked ever of Morgoth either mercy or death, for himself or for any of his kin. By the command of Morgoth, the orcs with great labor gathered all the bodies of those who had fallen in the great battle, and all their harness and weapons, and piled them in a great mound in the midst of Anfauglith, and it was like a hill that could be seen from afar. Howden Negdin, the elves named it, the Hill of Slain, and How-en Nerniath, the Hill of Tears. But grass came there, and grew again, long and green upon that hill, alone in all the desert that Morgoth made. And no creature of Morgoth trode thereafter upon the earth, beneath which the swords of the Eldar and the Edain crumbled into rust. What a lovely, terribly sad story that is. I was thinking we'd start Turin, but I think we'll save Turin for next time because my voice is a little hoarse. Thank you for joining me. I know that one was short, but the next story is the longest in the entire book, and I think we'll do all of it in one go next time. We're getting near to the end. Let's see here. We've got Turin is the next story, then Dariath Falls, then Tuor, and then Voyage of Arendil. There's another 2 sections that are not part of the, quote, Silmarillion, but I think they have some short stories of their own, but they're not long. We probably have about 50 pages left in the Silmarillion. Turin's story is one of those that was later turned into a full novel by Christopher Tolkien, of The Children of Hurin, I think it was called. The Children of Hurin, that's what it is. Excuse me. That's another one we'll read at some point. I've never read the full expanded versions of the books. There's of Beren and Luthien, The Children of Hurin, and The Fall of Gondolin, which are all things that we're reading about right now, but the full extended version comes later. So, thank you all for joining me. Check the description for links to the new t-shirts that I've posted. They will be sold for the next 14-ish days. If you like them, grab one. This is kind of a test run to see what people think of these designs. Let's see, books, you can buy those. Links also in the description. Support the channel if you like it. You know, all that. Tomorrow we probably won't be doing anything because I've had family in town for like a week and I'm kind of exhausted. So tomorrow I'm going to take a day off. But in a little bit I'll be streaming some Clock Tower and then maybe some Silent Hill and stuff. So thanks for joining me and I will see you guys next time. Bye.